There's a lot of noise around the WNBA right now. Posts, graphics, slogans, percentages flying around like they explain the whole story. And I want to be clear about something before we go any further. This is not an episode about whether WNBA players deserve more. They do. Full stop. This is also not an episode about choosing sides. This is an episode about why the talks feel stuck, why the numbers being shared online are confusing people, and why two groups of smart, well-intentioned people can look at the same league and come away with very different answers. Because right now you're seeing a lot of 70% versus 30% floating around, and on the surface, that sounds simple. It sounds like one side is being generous and the other side is asking for too much. But the truth is, those two numbers aren't even talking about the same thing. So before we get emotional, before we get frustrated, before we start yelling at each other online, let's slow this down and talk about what those numbers actually mean. When you hear people online say the players want 30% or the league offered 70%, it sounds like a negotiation happening on the same playing field. The problem is, it isn't. And this is where a lot of well-meaning fans get lost. Because when we hear percentages, our brains automatically assume that we're talking about the same pile of money, just divided differently. But that's not what's happening here. The entire disagreement starts with what revenue even counts. Let's slow this down. There's gross revenue, and then there's net revenue. Gross revenue is everything that comes in the door before you pay a single bill. Think about it like your household. Your gross income is your paycheck before rent, groceries, gas, childcare, insurance, and utilities. Net income is what's left after all of that is paid. Nobody budgets their life off of gross income. And no business survives pretending that expenses don't exist. Now apply that to the professional sports league. The WNBA's gross revenue, based on reporting, is estimated somewhere between $300 and $400 million. And that number matters. It shows growth, it shows relevance, it shows momentum. But here's the part that gets skipped online. The league also has enormous fixed costs. League operations, travel, staff, marketing, facilities, broadcast production, expansion infrastructure, those costs don't just shrink just because revenue is rising. If those expenses take up close to 90% of gross revenue, what's left, the net, is far smaller. That puts net revenue closer to 30 to 40 million, and this is where the percentages stop being honest. The league's reported proposal is roughly 70% of net revenue. It sounds massive until you do the math. 70% of 30 to 40 million is roughly 21 to 28 million. The player's proposal is roughly 30% of gross revenue. 30% of 300 to 400 million is 90 to 120 million. That gap isn't a negotiation tactic. It's a structural disagreement. And if you're sitting there thinking, wait, how did we get here? Good. That means you're actually paying attention. Because this isn't about one side being greedy or the other side being cheap. It's about whether players should be paid before the league absorbs its costs or after. And that distinction changes everything. This is why you're seeing frustration online. People are arguing past each other because they're arguing different math. They're hearing 70% and 30% and assuming it's a simple fairness debate. It's not. It's an argument about risk, timing, and what stage of growth the league is really in. And until those two sides agree on what revenue even matters, every percentage thrown into the conversation is going to feel misleading, because it is. Quick pause here. If this episode helped slow the conversation down for you, I'd really appreciate you subscribing or following the show wherever you're listening. This is the kind of space that we're trying to build here. Less noise, more understanding. And if you want to be a part of the conversation, the call-in line is always open at 216-452-8813. Thoughtful takes welcome. All right, now let's keep going. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you slow this down enough, both sides can believe that they're being reasonable. And that's hard for people to sit with because we're trained to look for a bad guy. But this isn't a story about greed versus fairness. It's a story about timing. Let's start with the players. From the players' perspective, the league is finally breaking through. Attendance is up, ratings are up, cultural relevance is up, sponsors are paying attention, and expansion is happening. And from their point of view, this is exactly the moment that you don't lock yourself into a model based on what the league used to be. They don't want to negotiate past value. They want a system that grows with the league, not one that celebrates growth in headlines while compensation lags behind it. That's why the players are focused on gross revenue. Gross revenue represents potential. It represents momentum. It represents where the league is going, not where it's been. Now look at the league side. From the league's perspective, growth doesn't erase fragility. Yes, revenue is rising, but so are the costs. Travel now is more expensive. Broadcast production is more expensive. Expansion costs money before it ever even makes money. And infrastructure has to be built before it can pay anyone back. The league isn't negotiating vibes. It's negotiating survival. If expenses are still eating up the majority of the revenue, then committing to a fixed share of gross revenue is a massive risk. Because once that money is promised, it doesn't disappear if a season underperforms. From that lens, the league's push towards net revenue, it isn't about control. It's about insulation. It's about making sure that the league doesn't outgrow its own foundation. And this is where the real tension lives. The players are negotiating for the league they believe is arriving. The league is negotiating for the league it's still trying to stabilize. Those are two timelines that don't line up neatly. And that's why both sides can look at the same numbers and feel justified. One side sees opportunities being delayed. The other side sees risk being underestimated. Neither side is crazy. Neither side is acting in bad faith. They're just standing on opposite ends of the same growth curve. And until those timelines overlap, until growth and stability arrive at the same moment, this conversation is going to feel tense. Because this isn't about money. It's about who absorbs the risk of becoming something bigger. Before we get into the last part of this conversation, let me take a moment to reset with our friends at W. One of the things I appreciate most about W is that it understands energy doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes you don't need a spike. You need clarity. W is a clean energy formula. No sugar, no crash, no junk. Just focus, endurance, and balance. The kind that lets you think clearly instead of burning yourself out chasing the next hit. And honestly, that matters. Whether you're breaking down a complex labor conversation like this, or just trying to get through a long day without trading your energy for something that doesn't give back. If you've been on the fence about trying W, now's a good time. Head to w.gg and use promo code Round Ball Rants to save on your order. That's Round Ball Rants at w.gg. All right, let's take that clarity and zoom out for the final segment. Okay, so once you strip away the percentages, once you move past the posts and the talking points, this entire negotiation comes down to one question. And it's not a math question. It's this. In a growing league, who should benefit first? Labor now or stability first? That's the real divide. Because what the players are really saying is growth is happening. The league is here. And if we wait for perfect stability, we'll always be waiting. They've seen this story before. In other leagues, in other industries, where value explodes, but the people creating it are told to be patient, just a little bit longer. From their perspective, patience has a cost. Now look at it from the league side. The league is saying we're growing, but we're not finished becoming what we need to be. Revenue growth doesn't automatically equal financial security. Momentum doesn't automatically mean margin. Visibility doesn't automatically pay the bills. And if the league overcommits too early, if it promises money that only exists in theory, it risks stalling the very growth everyone's excited about. So the question becomes, do you reward growth as it's happening, or do you protect the system until it can. Sustain that reward. This isn't unique to the WNBA. You see it in NIL deals in college sports. You see it in streaming platforms that grew faster than they could monetize. You see it in startups that scale before they stabilize. Every growing system eventually hits this crossroads. And here's the uncomfortable part. There isn't a more morally clean answer. There's only a timing answer. If players wait too long, they risk being locked into a structure that undervalues their peak moment. If the league moves too fast, it risks building on a foundation that can't hold the weight. That's the tension that you're feeling right now. That's why this negotiation feels heavier than a normal CBA fight. It's not just about what the league is, it's about what the league is trying to become. And those two versions, they don't always agree. So when you see frustration, when you see stalled talks, when you see people talking past each other, understand this. This isn't dysfunction. This is a growing league standing at a crossroads. And growth, real growth, is rarely smooth. Here's what I want to leave you with tonight. Growth is exciting, but growth is also demanding. It asks more questions than it answers. It forces conversations that we rather skip, and it tests whether we can stay present when progress stops being obvious. Right now, the WNBA is in one of those moments. Not a crisis, a test of maturity. This is what it looks like when a league stops asking if it belongs and starts figuring out how it lasts. And that matters. Because the people in this conversation, players, executives, and fans, they're not fighting over scraps. They're fighting over the shape of the future. Players are standing in their value and saying, we see where this is going, and we don't want to arrive late to our own moment. The league is saying, we want this growth to hold, not just today, but 10 years from now. Those two things don't cancel each other out. They actually depend on each other. Real progress isn't loud agreement. It's hard alignment. It's people pushing forward without losing sight of what's underneath them. And if you're listening to this, you're part of that ecosystem too. How we talk about these moments matters. How patient we're willing to be matters. How deeply we're willing to understand instead of react, that matters. Because leagues don't grow in isolation. They grow with the people who believe in them enough to stay when the story gets complicated. So stay with it. Stay invested, stay curious, stay supportive, even when the answers aren't immediate. This is what building something real sounds like. I'm Vincent Cooper. This was Round Ball Rants. Thank you for spending this time with me. And remember, it's not just basketball. It's therapy with a bounce.